1 million people lived in a desert city with flowing fountains and no electric pumps. This was the power of the silent aqueduct. These ancient waterways were gravity-fed marvels that solved one of civilization's most difficult problems, moving water across vast distances to build empires. By the end of this journey, you will understand the hidden engineering that allowed entire cities to thrive against impossible odds. How did a gentle slope carved in stone defeat the might of geography? What forgotten wisdom do these structures hold for our own world of growing thirst? When you think of humanity's greatest achievements, what deserves to be remembered? The thirst of a city is a powerful force, one that can drive its people to reshape the very land. For centuries, communities gathered where water was easily found, along rivers or around deep, reliable wells. This was a world defined by its immediate sources, a life of drawing what was needed from the ground or the sky. But then something shifted. A settlement became a town swelled into a metropolis, and the old ways began to crack under the weight of sheer numbers. The local river, once a life-giving artery, could become a sluggish, contaminated stream. Wells ran dangerously low during dry seasons, and rainwater collected in cisterns was never enough. The challenge was no longer just about finding water, it was about moving it. Imagine the pressure on those early leaders and engineers. Public health was at stake, with the threat of waterborne illness a constant shadow over crowded neighborhoods. The economic might of an empire, its capacity to grow and project power, was being strangled by a simple lack of clean, reliable water. This crisis point demanded a leap of imagination. Instead of clinging to what was nearby, they began to look outward toward the distant, untouched mountains where snowmelt and springs offered purity in abundance. The problem was monumental. How do you bring a mountain's worth of water to a city's heart without a single mechanical pump? The answer would lie in harnessing a silent, invisible force that was available to everyone, yet mastered by very few. That silent, invisible force was the steady pull of gravity itself. It was the master key that unlocked the flow of water across entire landscapes. While we often think of gravity in dramatic terms, like a falling apple, its most brilliant application was in its subtlety. Roman engineers became artists of this gentle slope. They designed their water channels with a downhill grade so slight it would be almost imperceptible to the human eye, sometimes a drop of only 30 centimeters over a distance of 1 kilometer. To achieve this perfection, they relied on ingenious tools. The chorobates was their ultimate leveling instrument, a long wooden frame with a central groove filled with water. By observing the water's surface, an engineer could confirm a true, unwavering plane across miles of uneven terrain. This precision was everything. A slope that was too steep would cause the water to rush forward, eroding the channel walls. A slope that was too flat, or worse, that accidentally tilted upward, would bring the entire system to a silent, stagnant halt. They were essentially building a perpetual motion machine for liquid, a system that worked day and night without a single pump, without any fuel, and in complete silence. It was a symphony of physics composed in stone and mortar, but knowing the principle was one thing. Applying it across mountains and valleys was the true test of genius. The true genius of the aqueducts lay not in the idea itself, but in the formidable organization behind their construction. These were not haphazard projects. They were the product of a professional class of engineers, many of whom learned their trade in the legions, where discipline, mathematics, and large-scale logistics were a matter of life and death. When these veterans turned to civil works, they brought a military-grade precision to the challenge of water. They worked from detailed manuals, with figures like Vitruvius laying down the principles of architecture and the water commissioner Frontinus meticulously documenting the entire system of Rome. In his writings, we hear the voice of a practical manager, even complaining about citizens who illegally tapped into the public lines, a problem that feels remarkably modern. This systematic approach meant that a solution devised for a valley in one province could be replicated and improved upon in another, creating a shared body of knowledge that spanned the empire. They standardized everything from the ideal slope of the channel to the formula for the waterproof cement that lined it, a mortar so durable it has survived for 2,000 years. This institutional knowledge transformed ambitious dreams into repeatable, reliable reality. It is why we can still trace the path of these silent waterways, following the ghost of a gradient laid down by minds that saw the landscape not as a series of obstacles, but as a canvas for gravity itself. The head of the water, the Caput Aquae, was the sacred starting point of this entire endeavor. It was a spring high in the clean mountain air, carefully selected and then protected by law from any form of pollution. This was the birth of the aqueduct, the first pure drop in a river that would flow for miles. From this source, the water entered its main conduit, the Specus, a covered stone channel that acted as a shielded artery. The covering was a stroke of practical genius, keeping the water cool, preventing evaporation under the sun, and stopping leaves, animals, or any other contaminants from spoiling the precious cargo. This channel began its long, silent descent, a journey that could span over 50 miles of rugged countryside. The surveyors who plotted this course were the unsung heroes. Their task was to find a path that maintained that perfect, gentle slope, weaving through the natural tapestry of the land. They had to avoid plunging into valleys that were too deep to cross and detour around hills that were too massive to cut through, all while keeping the water constantly, imperceptibly, falling toward its destination. That destination was the city's highest point, where a distribution tower known as a Castellum Aquae awaited. This structure was the grand finale of the journey, the moment the silent river finally reached the city gates. But how did the water complete its expedition when the land itself threw up impossible barriers, when a wide valley gaped open or a solid mountain stood directly in its path? The engineers had an answer for that too, and it required bending the very earth to their will. A hill standing directly in the path of the water was not an end, but a beginning. When the terrain refused to yield, Roman engineers simply went through it. They carved tunnels through solid rock, some stretching for miles in total darkness. Their method was a masterclass in coordination and geometry. Teams would dig a series of vertical shafts down from the hilltop to the planned level of the tunnel. These shafts served a triple purpose, providing fresh air for the workers, a means to remove rubble, and most crucially, reference points to ensure the separate tunneling crews, digging from both sides of the hill, would meet perfectly in the middle. The precision required was staggering, a testament to their skill with simple tools like the groma for sighting straight lines and the chorobates for maintaining the unerring downhill grade even underground. It was a monumental effort of human labor, but it guaranteed the water's path remained direct and true. When a wide, open valley presented itself, the solution rose into the sky. The iconic multi-tiered arcades, the structures we most commonly picture as aqueducts, were far more than beautiful monuments. They were functional triumphs of civil engineering. By carrying the water channel on a bridge of graceful stone arches, engineers could maintain the vital, gentle slope high above the valley floor. This elevated path was essential. It prevented the aqueduct from having to make a long, winding, and slope-losing descent into the valley, only to have to regain that elevation on the other side. Each arch was carefully designed to distribute the immense weight of the water-filled channel, and the use of multiple tiers allowed them to scale to incredible heights, turning a geographic chasm into a mere stepping stone for the flowing water. For the steepest and deepest valleys, however, they employed their most audacious invention, the inverted siphon. This system abandoned the open channel in favor of sealed pipes, often made of lead or stone, that plunged down one side of the valley and climbed up the other. It seems to defy logic, asking water to flow uphill, but the secret lies in a fundamental principle that water in a sealed system will always seek to level itself. The water would accelerate down the steep descent, building up enough pressure to force its way up the opposite slope, nearly reaching its original height. The nearly was the critical part. The system always lost a little bit of height due to friction, so engineers had to calculate this loss with exacting care. A miscalculation meant the water would stall, a silent failure in a pressurized pipe. These three approaches, the tunnel, the arcade, and the siphon, reveal a mindset that saw the landscape as a problem to be solved with physics and stone. Yet for all their structural genius, the water's journey was still not complete. It had reached the city, but how did a single stream transform into 1,000 fountains and 1,000,000 cups? This gentle slope was the aqueduct's beating heart, a mathematical secret hidden in plain sight. While the towering arcades captured the imagination, the true marvel was this invisible geometry etched into the stone. Engineers pursued a gradient of just 1/10 to 3/10 of 1%, a drop so minimal you could not perceive it by simply looking along the channel. To walk beside it for a full kilometer, the water level would only fall by the length of your forearm. This precision was not a mere suggestion. It was the difference between a functioning waterway and a catastrophic failure. A steeper slope would transform the water into a raging torrent, scouring the channel walls and undermining the very foundations of the structure. A flatter slope, however, was an even more insidious threat. The current would slow to a lazy crawl, allowing sand, silt, and organic matter to settle to the bottom. Over time, this accumulation would choke the conduit, turning the life-giving river into a stagnant, blocked canal. The challenge was maintaining this perfect pitch across dozens of miles of unpredictable terrain, a task that demanded more than just brilliant surveying. It required constant, active management of the water itself. Along the route, engineers built large, quiet pools known as settling tanks. Here, the water would pause for a moment, its speed dropping just enough for the suspended particles to drift gently to the bottom. Workers would periodically clean these tanks, removing the accumulated sediment to ensure the water entering the city was as clear as the mountain spring it came from. At the city's main distribution tower, another layer of control was implemented. A network of carefully calibrated bronze gates could be opened or closed, directing specific volumes of water into different lead pipes that fed the various city districts. This was the final transformation, turning a wild, natural flow into a disciplined municipal utility. The water had been captured, tamed, and delivered. Now, a new question arose for the city's administrators. How do you share this liquid treasure among 1,000,000 thirsty people without chaos or conflict? The water castle stood as the final, brilliant gatekeeper of the entire system. After its long journey from the mountains, the aqueduct channel emptied into this large, circular reservoir, the Castellum Aquae. Here, the rushing water finally came to a complete and purposeful rest. In the calm of the tank, any last particles of sand or silt, which had evaded the earlier settling pools, drifted slowly to the bottom. This final cleansing pause ensured the water delivered to the city was not just abundant but pure. Then came the moment of division. The walls of the castellum were pierced by multiple outlet pipes, each a calibrated artery leading to a different part of the urban body. The largest pipes were often directed toward the city's lifeblood, the public fountains. These were not decorative features, but essential hubs where the common people, especially those living in crowded apartment blocks, could collect their daily water. Other pipes carried a steady flow to the vast public bathhouses, centers of culture, cleanliness, and social life. A smaller, more exclusive set of channels might supply the villas of wealthy patrons or the imperial palaces, but the system's design revealed a clear and profound priority. By ensuring public access was built into the very foundation of the network, the engineers were building more than just plumbing. They were engineering a stable and healthy society. The water was no longer a wild force of nature. It had been measured, divided, and transformed into a managed public good. Its journey from a distant spring to a citizen's cup was now complete, and in that transformation, it defined the rhythm and quality of ancient urban life. The true power of the aqueduct was measured not in its grand arcades, but in the quiet hum of daily life at the public fountain. For the millions who called Rome home, the Lacus was the neighborhood's beating heart. Here, the long journey of the mountain water culminated in a simple, continuous overflow from a stone basin. This was where you met your neighbors, where you filled your clay jars for the day's cooking and drinking, and where the city's gossip and news flowed as freely as the water. The sound of splashing and the murmur of conversation were the sounds of a community sustained. This reliable access to clean water was a quiet revolution in public health. Before the aqueducts, crowded neighborhoods relied on shallow wells easily contaminated by seepage, or on the often polluted Tiber River. The constant flow of fresh, spring water dramatically reduced the spread of waterborne illnesses, creating a healthier, more resilient population. But the water's gift did not stop at the fountain's edge. It flowed onward, fueling one of the ancient world's most remarkable social institutions, the public bathhouse. These vast complexes, the thermae, were marvels of social engineering. A small entrance fee granted any citizen, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest laborer, access to a day of leisure. You could exercise in the palaestra, a courtyard for wrestling and ball games, then progress through a series of rooms, each with a different temperature, from the hot coldarium to the warm tepidarium, and the refreshing cold plunge of the frigidarium. Beyond the baths themselves were libraries filled with scrolls, lush gardens for strolling, and spaces for philosophical discussion. The bathhouse was not merely about getting clean. It was a university for the body and the mind, a place where the very idea of civic life was nurtured and strengthened. This democratization of a fundamental resource created a shared experience that cut across social divides, fostering a powerful sense of belonging and civic pride. Yet this generosity was also a brilliant political statement. The same water that filled a citizen's cup also cascaded into magnificent imperial fountains and filled the ornate pools of the emperor's palace. The state provided this life-giving abundance, and in doing so, it demonstrated its power, its organizational genius, and its benevolence for all to see. The water was a gift, but it was also a reminder of who held the keys to the empire's survival. But this engineering marvel was never just about water. The stone arcades marching across the horizon were a language of power, understood by everyone who saw them. When an emperor funded a new aqueduct, he was performing a masterstroke of political theater. He was not merely solving a logistical problem, he was presenting himself as a paternal benefactor, a bringer of life and health to his people. The message was carved into the very stone, with inscriptions and dedicatory plaques that explicitly linked the ruler's name to the flowing water. Every public fountain, every bustling bathhouse became a daily advertisement for his generosity and capability. For citizens, the constant, reliable flow was a tangible reason to support the regime. For visiting diplomats and potential adversaries, these structures were a silent, intimidating display of the empire's vast resources and technical genius. They demonstrated a civilization so advanced it could command rivers to cross valleys and quench the thirst of 1 million people on demand. This fusion of utility and ideology meant the aqueduct was a dual monument, a celebration of civic life that simultaneously cemented the emperor's legacy. The water's journey, therefore, did not end at the public fountain. It flowed onward into the most private and privileged spaces of the city, where its presence carried a very different yet equally powerful meaning. While the public fountain nourished the community, a different kind of water flowed behind the walls of private villas. For the Roman elite, a direct pipe from the main aqueduct was the ultimate sign of prosperity, a luxury purchased through expensive state licenses or granted as a special favor by the emperor. This private connection transformed daily life in ways the average citizen could only dream of. Inside these grand homes, water was no longer a commodity to be carried from a public square, but an ever-present element of domestic comfort. It fed private bath suites with heated pools, supplied flushing latrines that whisked waste away, and most impressively, it brought nature itself indoors. The centerpiece of a wealthy Roman's home was the atrium, an open courtyard where a jet of water played in a marble basin, cooling the air and creating a constant, soothing murmur. This indoor garden, filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming plants, was a living testament to the owner's command over the natural world. The sound of this private fountain was the sound of status itself, a clear divide between those who fetched their water and those for whom it simply arrived. Managing this exclusive access, however, required an entire administrative class. The water commissioner and his staff had to meticulously track these private grants, calibrating the size of the lead pipes to control the flow and prevent unauthorized siphoning that could drain the public supply. It was a constant battle against privilege and greed, a reminder that even the most brilliant engineering could be challenged by human nature. The aqueduct's journey from mountain spring to marble basin reveals a complex story, one of public welfare and private indulgence, of a resource that both united and divided the ancient city. A silent, flowing river required an army of guardians to protect it. The Curator Aquarum, Rome's water commissioner, held one of the most demanding administrative posts in the entire empire. He was not merely a plumber on a grand scale, but the chief executive of a vast and vital public utility. His staff was a small army of its own, including skilled architects who understood the structural principles of the channels, teams of scribes who kept meticulous records of flow rates and legal grants, and hundreds of slave laborers who performed the back-breaking work of cleaning and repair. This bureaucracy was the system's immune system, constantly working to fight off the inevitable decay and human interference that threatened the water's flow. The most famous of these commissioners, Sextus Julius Frontinus, left us an unparalleled gift, a detailed technical manual titled De Aqueductu on the aqueducts. In its dry, practical prose, we hear the voice of a seasoned manager taking stock of his domain. He catalogues the length and capacity of each aqueduct, the legal statutes governing who could draw water and how much, and he expresses a palpable frustration with the citizens who drilled secret, illegal taps into the lead pipes under the cover of night. His writings reveal a system under constant pressure, not just from the elements but from the very people it was designed to serve. His teams were the detectives and surgeons of the water network. They walked the channels daily, listening for the telltale hiss of a leak in a pressurized siphon or inspecting the stonework for cracks. They periodically drained sections of the conduit to send crews in to scrape away the thick crust of mineral deposits that slowly narrowed the passageway. When they found an illegal diversion, they had the authority to seal it and bring the offender to court, imposing heavy fines for stealing a public resource. This level of sophisticated, long-term management is what truly separated Roman engineering from a simple construction project. They understood that building the aqueduct was only the first step. Preserving it for generations required an unending commitment to oversight and maintenance. It was a perpetual war against entropy itself, a battle fought with ledgers and chisels to ensure the mountain water never stopped singing its quiet song through the city's heart. The silent river demanded constant vigilance. A crack in the mortar, a fallen branch, a single season of neglect, and the entire system could falter. Maintaining an aqueduct was a battle against nature itself, fought by a silent army of workers who patrolled the channels day after day. Their most common enemy was sediment, the slow, steady accumulation of silt and sand that threatened to choke the water's path. Teams would regularly enter the conduit through access shafts, scraping the channel floor clean to preserve its vital gradient. But a more insidious threat came from the water's own chemistry. Over decades, dissolved minerals would precipitate out, forming a rock-like crust on the channel walls called sinter. This material, while proving the water's purity, acted like plaque in an artery, gradually narrowing the passage and reducing the flow to a trickle. Removing it required teams of laborers with chisels and hammers, a painstaking process of breaking away the hardened deposits to restore the channel to its original capacity. This was grueling, unglamorous work, performed in dark, confined spaces, yet it was absolutely essential. The sophisticated network of access shafts and service walkways running alongside the elevated arcades were not an afterthought. They were the circulatory system of the maintenance regime, allowing inspectors and repair crews to reach any point of failure quickly. A minor leak in a lead pipe or a hairline fracture in a stone arch could be addressed before it escalated into a total collapse. This relentless upkeep represented a massive, ongoing investment, funded by the state treasury or through special taxes levied on the citizenry. It was the hidden, unending cost behind the public fountains and the flowing baths, a profound commitment to preserving a public good for future generations. The true measure of Roman engineering genius, therefore, lies not just in the ambition of their constructions, but in their stubborn, meticulous dedication to maintenance. This is why so many of these structures outlived the empire that built them, their silent flow a lasting monument not only to imperial power, but to the countless unnamed hands that kept the water moving. The stone arcades of Rome cast a long shadow, but they were far from alone in their genius. Across the globe, in the most unforgiving landscapes, other civilizations were writing their own chapters in the story of water. The Nabateans, for instance, carved their rose-red city of Petra directly into the cliffs of a desert wadi. Here, water was more precious than gold, and their solution was one of elegant redirection. They constructed a system of dams and channels to capture flash floods, then funneled that water through the narrow, winding Sick Canyon. This was not a bridge over the land, but a channel carved directly into the rock walls of the gorge itself, a hidden artery bringing life into the heart of the desert. Centuries earlier, on the island of Crete, the Minoans built multi-story palaces equipped with sophisticated terracotta pipe systems, complete with sealed joints and gradual slopes to manage wastewater and fresh supply. Even further back, the Assyrian king Sennacherib oversaw the construction of a monumental limestone aqueduct at Jerwan, an elevated channel that brought water to his capital city of Nineveh from over 50 miles away. This structure, built in the 7th century before the Common Era, stands as a testament to ambitions that predated Rome by generations. This drive to move water was a universal signature of advanced society. In the Americas, the mire of Palinck engineered underground, pressurized conduits that used the same siphon principle as the Romans to push water uphill, creating palace fountains that would not have looked out of place in Italy. High in the Andes, the Inca shaped massive stone blocks into perfect canals that marched across impossible terrain to supply their mountaintop citadels like Machu Picchu. Each culture looked at its own environment, its own available materials, and its own unique challenges, and from that local context, a universal answer emerged. The silent aqueduct was not a single invention, but a recurring dream of civilization. Yet one system, born in the arid heart of the Middle East, arguably represents the absolute pinnacle of this ancient art, a network so vast and so precise it would feed cities for centuries after its creators were gone. The Pont du Gard does not simply cross a river, it commands the landscape. Rising nearly 160 feet above the Garden River in southern France, this three-tiered arcade is a symphony in stone. For nearly 2,000 years, it has stood not as a ruin, but as a fully preserved piece of functional art, the most magnificent surviving segment of the aqueduct that brought water to the city of Nims. Its scale is humbling, but its true genius lies in the breathtaking precision hidden within its monumental form. The water channel at the very top maintains a gradient of just 0.04% across its entire length. This is a slope so slight it is almost non-existent, a drop of less than 1 inch for every 100 feet of travel. To achieve this perfect, nearly flat pitch on a bridge of such immense height was an act of geometric mastery. The water had to flow, but it could not rush. It had to move with a gentle, unwavering consistency, as if the river far below was irrelevant to its silent, purposeful journey. This required a structure of absolute stability, and the Romans achieved it with an almost supernatural understanding of balance and weight. The entire bridge was constructed from massive, locally quarried limestone blocks, some weighing over 6 tons. Yet not a single drop of mortar was used to hold them together. The builders relied solely on precise cutting and the crushing force of gravity, fitting each block to its neighbor with such accuracy that the entire structure breathes and flexes with the land, enduring floods that have swept away modern bridges. The first tier of arches, wide and robust, anchors the bridge to the riverbed, while the second tier repeats a stronger, more refined version of the same pattern. The top tier, which carries the water channel itself, is a line of smaller, more frequent arches that perfectly distribute the weight of the water. This graduated design creates a structure that is both incredibly strong and surprisingly graceful, a testament to the Roman philosophy that utility and beauty were two sides of the same coin. But the Pont du Gard was more than a water pipe in the sky. Its lower tier was deliberately widened to serve as a toll bridge for foot traffic, seamlessly integrating this marvel of engineering into the daily economic life of the province. It was not an isolated monument, but a vital piece of regional infrastructure, a place where the practical needs of trade met the awe-inspiring power of imperial engineering. To stand beneath its shadows is to understand that Roman ambition was not just about scale, but about a harmonious fusion of function, form, and enduring stability. The silent river was cradled in a material that seemed to defy time itself. Roman engineers did not just build with stone, they transformed it, creating a synthetic rock that has outlasted every empire that followed them. Their secret weapon was a revolutionary concrete known as opus caementitium. Unlike the concrete we use today, which can weaken and crumble over decades, the Roman version possessed a magical property. It could set and cure completely underwater, and most astonishingly, it actually grew stronger with the passing centuries. The formula was deceptively simple, a mixture of lime, aggregate-like rock fragments, and a special ingredient, a fine volcanic ash called pozzolana. This ash, harvested from regions like Pozzuoli near Naples, was the catalyst for a miracle. When mixed with lime and water, it triggered a slow, continuous chemical reaction. Over hundreds of years, microscopic crystals form within the matrix, filling every tiny pore and crack, making the material denser and more resilient. It was a self-healing stone, a technology we are only now beginning to replicate. But the concrete was just the foundation. For the water channel itself, where every drop was precious, they developed a supremely smooth and waterproof lining called opus signinum. This was a plaster made from slaked lime and crushed terracotta pottery, creating a hard, glassy surface that minimized friction for the flowing water and prevented any seepage. This attention to the molecular level ensured that the aqueduct's lifeblood did not waste away on its long journey. Yet for all their chemical genius, their mastery of pure stonework remains just as breathtaking. Look at the Pont du Gard, where massive blocks, some weighing over 6 tons, are stacked into towering arches without a single drop of mortar. The stability of the entire structure relies on the perfect cutting and placement of each individual stone. The faces were dressed so precisely that when set together, the weight was distributed evenly across the entire surface. This perfect fit created a structure that was not rigid and brittle, but one that could breathe, flexing subtly with thermal expansion, minor earth tremors, and the immense pressure of its own weight. This combination of chemical innovation and physical precision created a legacy we can measure with modern science. When researchers analyze samples of Roman concrete, they find a complex crystalline structure that is often stronger and more durable than its modern equivalent. The silent aqueducts are not just ruins, they are active scientific specimens still teaching us their ancient secrets. We can now read the silent aqueducts like an open book, using tools their creators could never have dreamed of. The precision of the Roman surveyor's chorobates has been replaced by the laser scanner, a device that maps every contour and crack of a structure with millimeter accuracy. Archaeologists and engineers use this data to build breathtakingly precise three-dimensional digital models. These are not just static pictures, they are dynamic simulations. They can apply virtual stresses to the arches of the Pont du Gard to see how it distributes immense weight, or they can trace the exact, ghostly path of the water's gradient across dozens of miles of countryside. This digital resurrection allows them to calculate the system's true flow rate with remarkable confidence. By knowing the channel's cross-sectional area and that perfectly engineered slope, they can determine not just how much water could theoretically move, but how much actually did, revealing the real volume of life that poured into an ancient city's heart each day. Yet the stones themselves hold an even deeper archive. The rock-like sinter deposits that slowly accumulated on the channel walls are a crystalline timeline. Scientists can analyze the chemical composition of these layers, slice by microscopic slice. The minerals and isotopes trapped within tell a story of changing water sources, periods of drought, and even the long-term environmental health of the watershed. This is like reading a 2,000-year-old environmental report card, etched in stone by the flowing water itself. These modern investigations consistently yield the same humbling conclusion. The Romans were not just skilled builders, they were masters of applied physics whose calculations were so refined that their systems often operated at near peak efficiency. We keep finding subtle design choices, a slight widening of a channel here, a strategic curve there, all intended to minimize turbulence and preserve energy. This scientific validation forces a profound shift in our historical perspective. If their engineering was this brilliant, this resilient, then the eventual silence of their aqueducts cannot be written off as a simple technological failure. It points to something far more complex than decay, a collapse not of stone and mortar, but of the intricate social and economic systems that maintain them. The water did not stop because the channels broke. The channels broke because the will to care for them faded away. The water did not stop flowing in a single, catastrophic moment. Its silence was a slow, creeping thing, measured not in days but in generations. The great arcades and tunnels did not fall to barbarian hordes, but to a far more mundane enemy, the slow retreat of institutional memory. As the centralized Roman state fragmented, the sophisticated bureaucracy that managed the water supply dissolved. The meticulous records kept by commissioners like Frontinus were lost or forgotten. The specialized guilds of engineers and the disciplined crews of maintenance workers disbanded, their irreplaceable knowledge scattering like dust on the wind. Without this constant, vigilant care, the system's delicate balance began to fail. Settling tanks filled with silt that no one came to remove, mineral deposits narrowed the channels to a thin stream, then to a trickle. A cracked arch in a remote valley, once repaired in a matter of days, was left untended until a winter storm brought a whole section crashing down. The lifeblood of the city was not severed, but it was allowed to bleed out drop by precious drop. For the people living in the shadow of these colossal structures in the centuries that followed, their original purpose became a mystery. A towering triple-tiered bridge spanning a deep river valley could not possibly be the work of ordinary humans. They were given names like the Giant's Bridge, fit only for the legends of a forgotten, more powerful age. Their smooth stone blocks and perfect arches became a convenient quarry for new castles, churches, and city walls. The very stones that had carried life were repurposed to build fortifications and homes, their engineering genius buried within the walls of a medieval chapel. The aqueducts were not just broken, they were erased from collective understanding, their function supplanted by a return to local wells and contaminated rivers. The quality of life and public health that the flowing water had guaranteed plummeted, a quiet regression that defined much of the early medieval period. Yet the ideas embedded in those stones were too powerful to remain lost forever. The Renaissance, with its fervent look back to classical learning, sparked a reawakening. Scholars pored over rediscovered Roman texts on engineering and architecture. Artists and architects traveling through Italy sketched the crumbling arcades, not as giants' works, but as human achievements to be studied and understood. They began to decode the silent language of the gentle slope and the gravity-fed channel. This revival of ancient knowledge did not merely spark nostalgia, it ignited a practical revolution. The growing cities of early modern Europe faced the same crises of thirst and sanitation that had once plagued Rome. Inspired by the classical model, engineers designed new systems for cities like London and Paris, using the same fundamental principle, moving clean water from distant sources using only gravity. The aqueducts of the Roman world were being reborn, not in stone, but in iron and brick, their core logic flowing directly into the veins of the modern metropolis. The silence had been broken not by the sound of returning water, but by the turning of a page, a rediscovery that would once again quench the world's thirst. These ancient waterways speak directly to our own age of growing thirst. Our modern world relies on a colossal, hidden energy expenditure, with electric pumps moving water across continents and up skyscrapers. The silent aqueduct presents a radical alternative, a model of resilience built not on power but on patience. Its core principle, gravity, is a perpetual, fuel-free engine. This is not a call to abandon technology, but to re-examine our priorities, to build systems that are inherently sustainable because they work with natural forces rather than constantly fighting against them. The Roman understanding began at the source, the protected mountain spring. They legally shielded these headwaters from pollution and development, a profound recognition that the quality of the entire system depended on the purity of its origin. For us, this translates to the critical, modern imperative of watershed conservation, of safeguarding the forests and wetlands that naturally filter and store our freshwater. The Roman system also challenges our economic assumptions about water itself. In their world, water rights were not automatically tied to land ownership. The state managed the resource as a public trust, granting access based on civic need and contribution. This created a fascinating precedent for contemporary debates, framing water not as a commodity to be bought and sold, but as a fundamental human right, essential for life and dignity. Their network of public fountains guaranteed a basic allotment to every citizen, a policy that fostered social stability and public health. By studying these ancient choices, we are not just admiring ruins, we are consulting a 2,000-year-old blueprint for equity and foresight. This historical perspective forces a humbling comparison, inviting us to examine one of the most ambitious and sophisticated water networks ever conceived, a system that in its scale and complexity arguably surpassed even the achievements of Rome itself. While Rome's survival depended on the uninterrupted flow from its aqueducts, the engineers of Constantinople chose a different path to security. They built for stillness. Deep beneath the bustling streets of the Eastern Roman capital lay a hidden, inverted city, a labyrinth of reservoirs designed to hoard a life-giving treasure. The most magnificent of these was the Basilica Cistern, a cavernous palace built not for people but for water. Entering it even today is a descent into another world. The air is cool and heavy with moisture. Dim light reveals a vast, silent space, its ceiling held aloft by a forest of hundreds of marble columns, each one reflecting perfectly in the dark, still water below. This was not merely a tank, it was a cathedral for water, an architectural statement that proclaimed the empire's resolve to never go thirsty. The sheer scale was a deliberate calculation of survival. The cistern could hold millions of gallons, enough to sustain the entire city for months. This immense stockpile was their ultimate insurance policy against the vulnerabilities of their own aqueducts. A prolonged drought in the distant hills, a siege by a foreign army, or even a single act of sabotage against the exposed water channels miles away, none of these threats could immediately imperil a city that kept an entire river locked safely within its walls. This was the philosophy of abundance made manifest in brick and mortar. Two of the cistern's columns rest on ancient, recycled pedestals, intricately carved with the twisting visage of Medusa. Placed sideways and upside down, these pagan heads were likely installed for practical support, yet their presence adds a layer of profound symbolism. They are a reminder of a world turned on its head, where the monsters of the old era now served a new Christian empire by supporting the very columns that cradled its survival. The silent, watchful gaze of Medusa guarded not a treasure of gold, but the clear, still water that was the city's true wealth. This Byzantine system of combining long-distance aqueducts with immense, decentralized storage represents a supreme evolution in ancient urban planning. It acknowledged that a constant flow was a potential weakness, while a deep reserve was the ultimate strength. How did other arid cultures, facing even more extreme scarcity, manage to not just store water, but to literally pull it from the dry desert air itself? Island cities dream of fresh water. In the heart of a vast lake, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was a paradox, a metropolis of canoes and causeways surrounded by undrinkable, salty water. Their survival depended on a leap of engineering every bit as bold as the Roman arcades. From the forested hills of Chapultepec on the distant shore, the Aztec king and poet Nezahualcoyotl oversaw the construction of a monumental aqueduct that snaked across the lakebed on a sturdy causeway. This was not a single, vulnerable pipe, but a brilliant duality. The system featured two parallel channels made of baked clay and mortar. While one channel carried a constant flow of fresh spring water into the city, the other stood empty, ready for its vital turn. This alternating rhythm was the system's genius, allowing for continuous maintenance without a single day of disruption for the city's 200,000 inhabitants. Teams could enter the idle channel to remove silt and repair any cracks, a proactive care schedule that kept the water pure and the pressure steady. This gravity-fed stream was the lifeblood that fed a city of a scale and complexity that defied its island setting. It flowed into a vast network of canals that crisscrossed the urban landscape, acting as liquid streets for canoes and a circulatory system for the famous chinampas, the floating gardens that bloomed with crops. These man-made islands, anchored to the lakebed and enriched with nutrient-rich mud, turned the very water into fertile land, creating an agricultural engine that sustained the massive population. When the Spanish conquistadors first laid eyes on this scene in the early 16th century, they were dumbfounded. They wrote letters back to Europe describing a city more magnificent than Venice, with towering temples rising from the water, bustling markets, and an order they could scarcely comprehend. The Aztec Aqueduct was a stunning, independent confirmation of a universal truth. Separated by an ocean and millennia of history, two great civilizations had each looked upon the same relentless pull of gravity and seen the same answer. The Spanish discovery was not merely a moment of military encounter, but a collision of two separate worlds of engineering wisdom, one about to be tragically silenced. The Trevi Fountain in Rome does not simply spray water, it exhales history. Every drop that cascades over its Baroque sculptures is a direct, living descendant of the ancient Aqua Virgin Aqueduct, a channel first conceived by Roman engineers and still flowing after more than 2 millennia. This is not a relic preserved behind glass, but a working piece of imperial infrastructure, its original purpose unchanged. The ghost of the aqueduct is not a metaphor here, it is the plumbing. This enduring presence reveals a profound truth. The very blueprint of our modern city was drawn by these ancient waterways. The concept of a municipal water utility, with its distant protected reservoirs, its long tunnels snaking through hills, and its calibrated distribution to different neighborhoods, is a direct inheritance from the Roman model. Our urban life is built upon a skeleton of Roman engineering principles, its bones still carrying the lifeblood of our metropolis. The channels have simply been reskinned, swapping stone and lead for iron and concrete, but the fundamental logic of gravity-fed flow from a pure source remains untouched. Modern engineers now study these ancient structures not as archaeologists but as colleagues. They analyze the self-healing properties of Roman concrete, seeking the recipe for a material that can last for thousands of years. They run fluid dynamics simulations on the gentle gradient of the Pont du Gard, learning how to move vast quantities of water with minimal energy expenditure. In an age concerned with sustainability, the silent aqueduct stands as a masterclass in low-energy design, a system powered not by fossil fuels but by planetary physics. To walk through any major city today is to tread upon the ghosts of these channels. Their routes often determine the placement of roads, the boundaries of districts, and the very location of our urban centers. The aqueduct's legacy is not just in the water that flows from our taps, but in the invisible grid of our streets and the foundational idea that a city's health depends on a shared, managed resource. What other secrets are hidden in the gentle slope of 2,000-year-old stone, waiting to offer solutions for the cities of the future? Even with our sophisticated technology, the silent aqueducts hold onto their deepest secrets. We can map their every stone with lasers, yet we still cannot fully replicate the human genius behind their creation. The precision of their leveling remains a breathtaking puzzle. How could a team using a simple water level and sighting rods achieve a gradient of less than 1% across 50 miles of broken terrain? The margin for error over such a distance is almost non-existent, a feat that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Perhaps their true tool was not just the chorobates, but an accumulated generational knowledge of the land itself, a feel for the flow of water that was passed down through apprenticeships and lost to time. Then there is the concrete. We know the ingredients lime and volcanic ash, but the exact mixing process, the specific ratios, and the curing conditions that gave it self-healing properties are a recipe we have yet to perfectly crack. Modern laboratories are still trying to reverse engineer this 2,000-year-old material, seeking the secret to its legendary longevity. And for all the aqueducts we have mapped, there is a persistent whisper of lost waterways. Entire branches, and perhaps even complete systems, are believed to lie buried beneath modern farmlands or the foundations of bustling cities, their routes known only from fragmentary texts or the ghostly impressions they leave on aerial surveys. The full economic impact of this water is another vibrant mystery. We know it supplied baths and fountains, but to what extent did it power industries? Did it enable large-scale tanning, dyeing, or milling operations on the outskirts of Rome, creating an industrial economy we have yet to fully quantify? These unanswered questions transform these stone channels from static ruins into a living field of inquiry. Every new discovery, whether a hidden section of conduit or a fresh analysis of ancient hydraulic cement, has the potential to rewrite a chapter of our shared history. The quest to understand them now relies on digital worlds, where researchers run endless simulations to test theories about flow and structure, proving that the silent river of knowledge is still flowing. A digital ghost now walks the line of the ancient aqueduct. Through virtual reality, you can stand at the mountain spring, the Caput Aquae, and follow the water's entire journey without moving a single stone. This is not a simple animation. It is a precise digital twin built from terabytes of laser scan data and archaeological records. Every curve of the channel, every subtle dip in the gradient, is replicated with millimeter accuracy. You can fly alongside the towering arcades, dip into the cool darkness of a maintenance shaft, and watch as clear water flows with a gentle murmur through a digitally restored specus. This immersive experience transforms abstract engineering into a sensory journey, allowing anyone, anywhere, to grasp the monumental scale and elegant logic of these systems in a way that diagrams and photographs never could. But the true power of this digital resurrection lies in its analytical brain. Using computational fluid dynamics, researchers can run a virtual river through these channels. They can test the exact flow rate, observing how water behaves around a sharp corner or how quickly sediment would settle in a gently sloped section. Was a particular aqueduct operating at peak capacity, or was it chronically underperforming due to mineral buildup? A simulation can provide the answer, solving debates that have lingered for centuries. These models become testing grounds for historical theories, allowing us to experiment with the past without ever touching a fragile ruin. This digital revival does more than solve old puzzles. It makes the silent aqueducts roar back to life for a global audience. A student in a classroom can don a headset and suddenly be transported to the Pont du Gard, understanding its function not from a textbook, but from the visceral experience of seeing the water channel flow high above a river. This accessibility is a new form of preservation, safeguarding these wonders not just in stone, but in the collective imagination. It allows us to appreciate the harmony of their design, the sheer audacity of their construction, and the profound journey this water has taken, both through the landscape and through the long corridor of time, to quench the thirst of civilizations and shape the world we live in today. Their legacy is a quiet echo in the stone, a testament to what humanity can achieve when ambition walks hand in hand with the laws of nature. The silent aqueducts were not just feats of construction, they were a philosophy carved into the landscape. They represent a perfect union of grand vision and profound intellect, all channeled through a deep respect for the simple, unyielding pull of gravity and the life-giving power of water. These structures whisper a timeless lesson that our most powerful innovations are not always complex new inventions, but are often the most elegant applications of the fundamental principles that have always surrounded us. They understood that true infrastructure is not merely about function, it is the very bedrock upon which a civilization is built, sustained, and allowed to flourish. From the constant murmur of a Roman public fountain, where community life pulsed with every overflowing basin, to the profound, still reserves within the cavernous cisterns of Constantinople, these waterways did far more than quench a physical thirst. They nourished the roots of culture, enabling the arts, philosophy, and social life to thrive. They enabled explosive urban growth, supporting populations of a scale once thought impossible. And for centuries, they projected a calm, unassailable power, a statement of an empire's organizational genius etched across the horizon. As we navigate our own era of growing thirst and environmental uncertainty, the wisdom left by these ancient engineers is not a relic, it is a relevant and urgent guide. Their principles of sustainability, harnessing natural energy instead of fighting it, their commitment to public access, ensuring a fundamental resource reached every level of society, and their focus on resilient, long-term design, all speak directly to the challenges we face today. Let the silent, enduring flow of this history inspire your own journey of curiosity. We would love to hear which ancient wonder captures your imagination most powerfully. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to continue unraveling the profound mysteries of our shared past together. They speak in the language of stone and silence. Long after the legions disbanded and the marble forums became fields for grazing sheep, the water continues its quiet journey. You can hear its whisper if you know how to listen. It is in the faint, persistent trickle through a cracked speckous channel, a sound that has outlasted every emperor who ever commanded its flow. It is in the solitary arch of an aqueduct standing sentinel in a farmer's field, a monument not to conquest but to the sheer, patient power of human foresight. These structures were not acts of brute force against the landscape, but a deep and profound collaboration with it. They moved mountains by understanding them, by tracing the subtle lines of descent that gravity had already drawn. The true legacy of these empires is not found in the brittle pages of a forgotten scroll, but here, carved into the bones of the earth itself. It is a testament written in gradient and flow, a story that does not end with the fall of a dynasty, but continues its silent course toward a future still being written. This whisper from the past carries an urgent question for our own time. What will our own lasting signature on the world be? What will we build, not for ourselves, but for the quiet centuries to come?